Give me the money. Click, click. Psh. I am the sound effect. Bust.
And with this, welcome to this new and also very special video, because today we have the opportunity to look at this Titan ADA. This is a card that was never released, and it was supposed to be the highest performing card out of the ADA Loveless generation, thus RTX 40 series. It is using a full-size 8102 chip that has more performance than an RTX 4090, coming closer to it than RTX 5090. Now the question is, how much performance did we miss that NVIDIA never launched? That is something we will check out today.
Whoosh. I am the sound effect.
The Seasonic Prime PX 2200 is currently one of the strongest PSUs available, and it comes with two native PCIe 5.1 connectors, which allows to even hook up natively to RTX 5090. That is perfect for any overclocking system or high-end workstations. I'm also currently running this PSU, and so far I'm really satisfied with its quality and performance. The cables are very flexible, there are also cable comms included, and in addition also a 90-degree ATX 24-pin adapter, which also functions as a PSU tester at the same time. The fan is semi-passive, and even at a high load it is still very quiet. Find all information about this PSU in the link in the description. This Titan ADA is by far the biggest GPU that I ever held in my hand. It's an absolute gorgeous design and also impressive in terms of size and also weight. It is also completely different to what you might know from the RTX 4090, because back then with RTX 4090 you would have the PCB that contained the GPU sitting behind here. But with this one you have the PCB that contains the GPU sitting underneath here. This is something very similar to a prototype of an RTX 4090 or 4090 Ti that Gamers Nexus Steve showed a while ago. So they should be quite similar, because there is one thing: if you look basically through the card, through the heatsink, you can basically look through the entire card except for the bottom piece right here. But everything else is just a massive, absolutely massive and beautiful looking heatsink. And this becomes even more impressive and clear once we place an RTX 4090 that is already a huge thing directly on top. Make sure that it's flush on just the bottom side and also on the slot area. And if we now turn this around, the difference between the triple slot and the quad slot becomes even more clear. While the triple slot already being an absolutely massive graphics card, this is even bigger. And also you will notice that the Titan comes with dual 12-volt high power connectors, while the RTX 4090 only had a single one. But it's not only the height, it's also the width that was increased. That becomes clear when you take a look at this. So the length is the same, but in width I think it's about 8 to 10 millimeters more. So the overall volume increased quite a lot compared to the RTX 4090. In the I/O area, it's more or less the same, just in a different layout, because on the 4090 you have the PCB here, and here you have the PCB in that direction. That means that it's just a different orientation. But we still have a triple DisplayPort and a single HDMI, and we have an outlet for hot air blowing out of the system. But I think this right here is a little bit less area actually than on the 4090. On the front side we have the Titan logo that will also light up later once we power the card on. And what I find impressive is that you also have the small Titan engraving on the bottom right here, which shows that this card was fully designed in all detail. And to me, this doesn't even look like a real prototype anymore. This is like something that is close to being a production, which shows that it's not just, random testing of a different PCB and a different GPU. This was definitely supposed to be a final product. But it's not only the design about this card that is so special, it's mainly the GPU, which is the full-size 8102 that contains 12% more shader units than on an RTX 4090. I created this overview for you with the most relevant cards for a comparison. It's not quite clear when NVIDIA wanted to launch the Titan ADA, but this card was definitely using the 8102 450. And if we compare this with the professional RTX 6000 ADA, so the biggest GPU that was launched for the ADA generation, then we can see that the Titan ADA should have been faster in basically everything. It would have used 18,432 shaders and thus 12.5% more than the RTX 4090. Now if we compare this with an RTX 5090, the 5090 would even have 18% more shader units than the Titan Ada. And with this bigger chip that the Titan Ada is using, in the same kind of proportion, it is also using 12% more TMUs, ROPs, tensor cores and RT cores. The memory type on the Titan Ada is the same than on the RTX 4090, GDDR6X, using 384-bit bus. But it's using twice as much, 48 gigabytes. In my overview, I listed the card with a TDP of 450 watts, which is not the same as, for example, Tech Power Up listed, because they listed this card with 800 watts. I'm not quite sure where this comes from, but at least from my testing, looking at the power consumption, yeah, the 800 watts don't really seem to make sense, but we will get back to that topic later. The recent RTX 5090, as you know, is using GDDR7. And also, if you go back to the RTX 4090, if you ever overclock this card, you would quickly find out that overclocking the memory would help a lot more in terms of gaining performance versus overclocking the GPU. And this would quickly show or highlight that the Ada generation, the RTX 4090, was often memory bottlenecked, at least when it comes to the memory speed. Now, it's cool that a Titan Ada is using twice as much memory, but in most cases, unless you use some kind of professional application, just the double memory capacity won't give you that much more performance. The RTX 5090 would still be superior in terms of just memory speed itself. The size of this thing is still absurd to me. It looks really cool though, with the Titan logo. And as you can see, yeah, dual 12-volt high power connectors. And also this X lights up, similar to what we've seen with the 40 and also 50th generation. The card is installed, fully working, driver is installed, and obviously GPU-Z doesn't know the device. That's why it's not displaying like Titan Ada here on top. That is something that would have to be put into a library, I guess, tied to the device ID. But we can see that it's using the full-size Ada GPU with 18,432 shader units, with 192 ROPs and 576 TMUs, and also the 48 GB of GDDR6 memory. What I can also show you is that the driver is from 2023. Don't be surprised, at this point I can't show any details when it comes to the BIOS version or the driver version. The only thing I can tell you is that this driver is from 2023, which also brings some challenges with it, because it means that we can't test some of the more recent games when we want to compare the performance, for example, and even if we compare older games, there might still be a slight performance penalty. I will first run 3DMark Timespy Extreme because this is a very well-known benchmark for me. It's easy to determine the performance. I have a good database, and also it's an older benchmark. That means that it has absolutely no problem running on this a little bit older driver. What is absolutely impressive is how this card performs in terms of noise level and also coil whine. The coil whine is almost not present at all, and the card is overall extremely quiet, very pleasant. And here we can see a result of 139 FPS. If we now compare this in the chart, the Titan Ada comes quite close to the RTX 5090. With its 139 FPS, the Titan Ada is 15% faster than the RTX 4090 and only consumes additional 14% of power. This means that the performance increase is actually quite efficient. And the RTX 5090 is only 11% faster than the Titan Ada. In this quite old 3DMark Timespy Extreme, it's quite unlikely that the 5090 can make any use of a newer driver, and that's why we can probably see only a smaller gap. Whereas if we will now go over to the 3DMark Speedway, that is a little bit newer, it could be that there is a performance advantage using a newer driver version on the RTX 5090, because we can definitely see a bigger gap there. Yet the card works absolutely perfect in this benchmark, no issues at all using it, and it's again very quiet, very pleasant. In this 3DMark Speedway, the Titan Ada is with 109 FPS, only about 7% faster than the RTX 4090. And it's also only pulling 439 watts, which is a lot less than I personally expected when I got the card the first time. The RTX 5090 is still 33% faster than the Titan Ada, so it's absolutely out of reach. Yeah, Remnant 2, I can tell you, awesome game. That's why, I personally love to play this game. That's why I also added to the benchmark, and this one works. And the card generally behaves the same as in the 3DMark, just as usual with the game's slightly lower load. So we see about the same clock, slightly higher GPU clock, but slightly lower power consumption, about 400 watts under load. In Remnant 2, the Titan Ada is delivering 82 FPS on average, 68 in the 1% low, and is consuming 382 watts on average. That is only 30 watts more than the RTX 4090. And with this, the Titan Ada is about 10% faster than the 4090. The newer 5090 is only about 16% faster than the Titan Ada. And if you now keep in mind that there is an entire generation in between those two GPUs, it becomes clear that the 5090 is even less impressive, especially if you also look at the much increased power consumption of over 500 watts. Overall, the Titan Ada is much more efficient. Fortunately, Cyberpunk is now also already a quite old game and runs without any issues on the Titan. We see quite impressive 87 FPS on average, which is 22% more than the 4090. The 5090 is about 26% faster than the Titan Ada. Again, you can see how much more power the 5090 pulls in comparison to the Ada generation. I would have loved to test more games, but the majority wouldn't even start and some would have issues. For example, Assassin's Creed Mirage, as you can see here. I mean, it works, but only to a certain degree. But if we open GPU-C while the game is running, we can see the card is not going properly into the 3D mode. It's only running 780 MHz, and once this happens, it's also stuck in the state and we have to reboot. We will take a look again at efficiency because this honestly surprised me. Looking at the card the first time, I was like, okay, this is probably going to be worse than a 5090, but the opposite turned out to be the case. In Cyberpunk, the Titan Ada delivers 0.21 FPS per watt and thus beats both RTX 4090 and also the newer RTX 5090, even though the difference is quite small. But at least in the configuration that I tested, the Titan Ada was the most efficient out of the three. So much for the first video about the Titan Ada. We will definitely have a second and a third video discussing topics such as the dual 12-volt high power connectors, which we didn't really talk about yet, and also disassembling the card and all that, which I didn't really even do myself. But for what it is, this card is absolutely impressive, and I would have loved to see this on the market, especially if you think back 2 years, compare this with the 4090. It would have been absolutely impressive performance, and it was also, you know, in terms of design, it looks awesome, and it performs great. Like noise level and everything was absolutely fantastic. The question that remains is, why did this card never make it to the retail market? And obviously that is just pure speculation, but I think the performance might be one reason. If we go back in time, this card would have been an impressive upgrade over the RTX 4090. If you think about 10, maybe 15% additional performance, twice the amount of memory, especially for workstations, this would have been a very interesting card. At the same time, it's a problem because NVIDIA was probably already working on the RTX 5090, knowing that the performance gap in between those two would have been even smaller. And as we saw in some cases, it's like 10 to 15% performance difference, like the 5090 being sometimes 10 to 15% only faster than this card. And then think about it, me being a reviewer, reviewing the card like this card versus this one, it would not have been impressive. The 5090 launch was already quite difficult, and with this card being there, it would have been an even bigger problem, at least from my perspective. Another thing that might go into this is the sheer size of this thing. If you think about it, it's the same thing that Gamers Nexus Steve showed with the 4090 Ti prototype. I think the cooler is exactly the same, just, you know, different color and the Titan logo and all that. But still, it's a quad slot design. It's very heavy, the volume is massive. It also brings challenges, you know, just shipping and then mounting this in the system. If you're a system integrator, this could definitely be a challenge. Mounting this somewhere, assembling a system with it. That could definitely be one point where NVIDIA said, this is maybe too much. And that's something they definitely greatly improved with the RTX 5090. All right, so much for this special video. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye-bye.
The more you buy,
the more you save.